So, good afternoon. I think we're an hour after lunch and an hour before the next coffee break, so I feel like the goal of my presentation should be just keeping everybody awake. About 2 years ago, I had an amazing opportunity to travel around Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and to talk at teachers about the way that they could use technology in the classroom. And so I put together this, what I thought was a great presentation. I had slides filled with all these amazing free resources that they could get, Google Earth and wikis and blogs and free graphic design software. And at the end of my presentation, there'd be polite applause, and then inevitably one teacher would stand up and say, you know, John, this is all great, but what if we don't have computers and internet in our classroom? And I, of course, being the expert, I would stand and I would respond with, yeah, well, I guess I've basically just wasted 2 hours of your life. I'm really sorry. But at least I got you out of the classroom for an afternoon, right? That was a good thing. But the whole experience really got me thinking about how we view technology, and specifically about our concepts of invention. And this is why I want to talk with you about today, is how we view invention today and how we can use it to help us bridge the gap that we have in education. So I'd like to put it, there we go, invention. So I'd like to start with sharing with you just my definition of invention, which is the practical application of imagination to solve a problem. Now, it will come as no surprise that in the developed world, in general, we tend to be obsessed with the new cars, new movies, new fashions. This is what captures our imagination most often, and this is also what fuels our media. Think about, when was the last time that you read a story saying that something old was better than something new? We just don't get that. And this is especially true in the area of technology. Today, we're really only impressed if we can, see a piece of hardware that is lighter or softer, or if we get lighter or smaller, sorry. If we get software that allows us to create or connect with our community more easily, if something has a higher resolution, these are the things that impress us today. And honestly, I'm no different than anyone else. You show me something shiny with an extra button on it, and I start to drool. It's a Pavlovian response. But what's interesting is the impact that this fascination, this obsession we have with the new, has on our value judgment system. Basically, what ends up happening is we compare new things to their older versions. And specifically, we start looking for points of difference. And for every area where the new is different from the old, we assign value to the new. And we detract value from the old. And so what happens is, with every point of difference identified, the value of the old decreases exponentially, until it gets to a point where it essentially becomes worthless in our eyes. And this is regardless of its actual inherent positive qualities or the emotional connection we might have had with it before the new thing came onto the market. And we all have that experience. We loved our cell phones. We loved our cell phones until we got our new cell phone. So this obsession that we have with the new is fueled in large part by the fact that today the tools, or invention and innovation, are happening at a pace that we've never seen before in human history. And this is due in large part to the broadening access that we have today to the tools of creation. If you think about it, never before have we been able to conceive of, code, and market an application to a market of 1 million people in just a matter of a few days. and this is a reality that we have today, and it is a good thing. Anything that sparks creativity, anything that allows us to stimulate a new economy is positive, unless, of course, you're thinking of new ways to commit mass murder or something, right? I think we can all agree that's just inherently bad. But we do have 3 serious consequences to this obsession. The first is, obviously, we're creating more e-waste than we ever have before. Our landfills are starting to fill up with old cell phones, old monitors, old computers. So that's one problem that we're going to have to be addressing. The second is more a matter of perception. In this case, the way that we value invention is based on how creative it is. In other words, today we see a problem and we want to create a solution from scratch. And more importantly, if the result of this process of invention is radically different than anything we've ever seen before, we give it even more value. We don't want our new things to look like the old, no matter how good they might be or not be at solving our actual problem. The third is the issue that probably has the most to do with education. And this is, as our processes of invention and innovation are speeding up in the developing world, those without access to the tools of creation are being left behind at an equally rapid pace. Now, this is going to require us to face a very hard truth. And it's not easy, and it's probably not a very popular thing to say. But the truth is that this gap is never going to close. If we're going to overcome these problems, we're going to have to think about strategies that go beyond simply trying to equip those that do not have resources with the tools that they need so they can keep up with the developed world. We just can't do it. And the reason is very simple. The speed and scale at which we can give, no matter how big our hearts are, the speed and scale at which we can give is never going to match the speed at which we can create and market new products. There's always going to be a lag. So, if this is the reality that we're facing, then maybe it's time that we start rethinking invention. Invention does not have to be an act of pure creation. If we look at developing countries, specifically if we start looking at communities where resources are scarce, and by this I mean water, drinkable water, food, shelter, in these communities, invention means something different. Here, invention means repurposing, taking something old and giving it new life so it serves a new function. This act of invention, although it's not really driven by the joy of creation, it's actually driven more by a need just to survive. But this act of invention is equally valuable. We just don't want to see it because we're so focused on the new. But this act of invention creates very interesting products. We can see here, obviously, we're all familiar with the idea of bicycle generators, repurposing old vehicles for a new purpose, using light bulbs as planters for seedlings. And of course, we heard earlier, repurposing plastic bottles filled with garbage to become the building blocks for schools. Even though we are using old products and we're not really adding anything new except our ingenuity, these have inherent value inside their context. And so, if we are able to make a paradigm shift and stop thinking of invention as purely being an act of creation and start thinking of it as also being an act of repurposing, we suddenly, and blending these two acts of invention together in innovative ways, we can start opening ourselves up to all kinds of new and interesting opportunities. And we start by thinking about the idea of education. If we begin with the new, if we think about creating an online educational hub, this hub will be using the latest database technology to act as a repository of digital textbooks, student records, teacher resources, and we combine that database with the latest in real-time communication strategies, then we've got a new system upon which we can build. But then let's look at old technologies for our delivery channels. Let's look at the technologies of newspapers, the technology of radio, and the technology of cell phones. You know, I was reading an article the other day, and I think there's 14.3 million people in Guatemala and over 18 million cell phones. So I don't think that cell phones are a limited resource in this country. I know, please raise your hand if you've got an old cell phone or two kicking around your house or apartment you could give away. Right? So if we now start using our imagination and we combine these together, how could it work? Well, let's start with the newspaper channels. The content for that school year, let's say it's a semester's worth of a math workbook or a language arts workbook, gets sent out using newspaper distribution channels to the communities. And I think we can all admit that nobody is better at distributing print content on a daily basis than newspapers. So let's utilize that resource and send this print material that could be, manufactured on low-cost recycled paper to the different communities. Now, in the classroom, I thought they were waving at me. Hi. No? So let's imagine then that in the classrooms, we have a radio. And broadcast from our hub are lectures, pre-recorded educational programming, tests, exams, to the different classrooms. And we know it's a reality in many of these communities where we have multiple age groups, multiple grades, located in one classroom with one teacher. Great, we can set up 2 or 3 radios. Radios aren't that expensive. And using headphones, the students can listen in on their specific programming in groups. The teacher is now freed up to start moving around the classroom and helping those students that need it. As the student is listening to the broadcast, they're answering questions in their workbook, and they're also answering the questions on their cell phone. The program asks, what's 2 plus 2? And Juan types in 4, and SMSs that back to the database. So now the database is able to start collecting data in real time. And as the teacher is moving around, they can be receiving SMSs from the database as well, from this education hub, saying, Juan had a problem with question number 5. Go over and help him. So this type of automation can start working very, very quickly. Let's take it a step further. Let's imagine now that we plug this into a real-time support network for the teachers. So now, if the teacher is having problems in their classroom, they can text message it to the hub. It gets disseminated to the teaching community, and the answers can be crowdsourced in real time. The teacher can be receiving responses. Even more than that, the Ministry of Education, for larger scale problems, can be receiving reports, which will reduce their reaction time and allow them to focus on specific areas very, very quickly. So, if we want to, we can even begin to really expand our imagination and think, okay, let's replace just regular cell phones with smartphones, equipped with cameras and 3G connectivity. Now we can start embedding QR codes into the workbooks, and the students can have real-time access to videos, they can have access to additional audio content, additional quizzes. The teachers can even use it for as part of their support network. And with the real-time data processing, education can start becoming more and more personalized. If Jorge is having problems on one specific area, the hub will know to send him additional content or to notify the teacher that this is where he's having issues. So this allows us to start, growing and growing and growing because we're using new technologies with technologies that already exist and are in hand. Newspaper networks, radios, cell phones. And this is, of course, just one idea. We can recycle our old technology, put it to good purpose. We can combine old and new technologies together in innovative ways. But we still might look at the problems that we're facing today. And we might say to ourselves, yes, this is all well, and this is all good, but, the problems that we have are insurmountable. And I think there's something that we need to remember about the act of invention. It has a very, very powerful side effect. When we invent, when we give ourselves the freedom to imagine and to create, we also make space for hope. And when we've empowered ourselves to create and to believe, then we're taking the first steps to making these solutions, as crazy, as ambitious as they might seem right now, we're taking the first steps towards making those a reality. Thank you very much.